Okay, everybody, let's take it from the top.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Hi-ho, everybody, and welcome back to D Plus Us, the show about all things Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, anything owned by Disney, pretty much, which is, practically the entire
Everything.
world at this point. I'm one of your hosts, Griffin and Griffy D-Pad, as always, is the wonderful, the amazing, the fantastic, the marvelous Mr. Mitch George. How you doing?
Multiverse Saga's getting weird. It's off to a weird kind of middle, I guess. You could count it as.
Weird
It's like at
middle.
the halfway point, and they don't know what they're doing. It's great.
Yeah, it's the beginning of Phase 5. That's right, folks. We are talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. But of course, we are not alone. We have a 4-person show today. Guys, how you doing?
Fantastic. I'm feeling a little manic. I think that's appropriate, maybe?
I think so. Brad, yourself?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you guys back.
Yes,
If people
appreciate
don't
it.
remember you from the last time you were on, you want to give a quick intro to who you are, Brad, Steve?
Sure, yeah. I'm Brad Shankar from Mobile Syrup, a Canadian tech publication. I'm the gaming editor there, so I mostly do the gaming stuff, though I do some streaming stuff on the side. We were last on this for Die Hard.
Yeah, we
I
were.
guess
Yep.
whenever I'm on, Steve's going to follow me, I guess
so.
is the rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve was on that episode too, and we had a great conversation about that Christmas classic.
Oof. Oh, what a
Yes.
great episode that was. And
It was a blast.
for people who may not know me, I'm Steve Vegvari, freelance writer, host, and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm always down to chat with you guys. And yeah, anytime that Brad's invited here, I then have to join in as well. That's just the rule. I'm sorry.
I mean, I put out the call,
I'm
and
fine with
the first two people who got back to me was the two. So I'm just like, all right, it was
you
meant
go.
to be. It
Yeah,
was meant to be.
exactly.
And it works out. It works out. And it generally works out very well.
Except when it comes to the movie that we're talking about, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're going to agree. Let's hit y'all with the facts before we really jump into this. Of course, we're talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. It did just come out on Friday. We are starting spoiler-free. We're not going to immediately spoil the crap out of this movie. So we will give you all the spoiler warning. If you don't want to wait, there will be a time code down in the description for when spoilers start. I'll give you all the basic information, though. Directed by Peyton Reed, written by Jeff Loveness. Jeff Loveness writing other stuff for Marvel. He is currently the writer on the King Dynasty.
Uh-oh.
Worth noting. He's also done some stuff for Marvel Comics. He did the Groot series, part of the Nova series, and did a special for Amazing Spider-Man. Of course, stars of this are Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, Jonathan Majors, Catherine Newton, Bill Murray, kind of, sort of, Michelle Pfeiffer,
Lincoln, you'll miss
and
it.
Michael Douglas. Music by Christoph Beck. Released February 6th, 2023 as the actual red carpet premiere, and then released to all of us on February 17th, 2023. Runtime of 124 minutes. And the opening box office numbers, always interesting to see this one. This one has not been doing well critically, but is still doing very successfully. That wonderful, wonderful Marvel power. It has domestic opening of 104 million, worldwide opening of $225 million. Mitch, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah.
How did you feel leaving the theater after seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania?
Okay. Is the number of post-credit scenes a spoiler? I feel like as long as I keep that spoiler-free, I think we're okay.
There's two. I'll just tell you.
There are two. There's a mid-credit and a post-credit scene. I was incredibly excited about what happened in the post-credit scene, and that was probably the most excited I was in the entirety of going through this movie. There was just some really odd choices, some plot lines I wish they had further... going into this, it's a 2-hour movie. I'm like, oh, that's great. It's going to be nice to saying to the point. I feel like this should have been more of like a 2.5-hour movie, because I feel like there was just some plot points that weren't fully explored and would have made, for me at least, the character of Casey Lang much more enjoyable within the film, where they start to go down certain paths and then they don't. It just feels like a film of half measures, where there was a lot that I feel like was maybe left on the cutting room floor or was reshot, because I did find some evidence of a specific scene that we'll get to that was reshot within a month of the film's release. And that's never a good thing for any movie, especially with what that scene is. So that for me, it's like, okay, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is going to go down as the Thor: The Dark World / Avengers: Age of Ultron of the multiverse saga. It is a movie that,
Wow, that
in
is
essence,
bold.
the movie, when it releases, is not going to do well with critics or with fans, but over time, future properties will redeem it in some way.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm on the complete opposite spectrum, but we'll get to me at the end. Steve, what did you think of this movie?
I love how Mitch ended that off because that's exactly how I felt. I felt coming out of it, I was like, this movie reminds me specifically of Age of Ultron, where I walked out of it feeling absolutely nothing. Like, and I don't mean that as in like I'm trying to harp on it as that I'm super negative, but I just feel like super middle of the road where going in, I felt like this movie was too big to fail, and pun intended, I know. But just everything that they were setting up, like this is the introduction of Kang, the beginning of this dynasty and everything. I was like, okay, we're finally getting to the multiversal threat. We're like, this is the movie to introduce the stakes, everything. And it couldn't have been more succinct that we were all sitting there. Granted, it was a 4:00 premiere, like the Thursday, so like opening day. Granted, it was 4:00, so theater wasn't too packed, but you get your Marvel Studios reel, the logo and everything. And there was one guy who read the room and just stopped clapping. And usually for like an end game, any movie, big or small, people are like hooing and hollering at like an opening event, and that's when the dead silence. I was like, uh-oh, people are not.
That's my worst fear, is to be that person.
Oh, good on him. Like, I respected the hell out of that guy, because I was like, man, I really wish I had that much enthusiasm going into this movie. But as it went on, and I was like, man, there were great elements. I want to see great elements in this movie, but then it's bogged down by exactly what Mitch said, just some underdeveloped aspects, some weird decision making here. It almost feels like the movie is just 2/3 act 1 and then a rushed act 3. It doesn't feel like there's any kind of middle there. And then, yeah, it just kind of ends without there being the stakes I was hoping for, especially, again, going back, we're introducing all this baggage that's going to be thrown in from now until the end of phase 6. You'd expect there to be like consequences, baggage, and everything. I was just like, oh, okay, we ended the movie and it was fine. But then, like, again, I want to echo what kind of Mitch is saying. Post-credit scenes I was popping off for, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. But why wasn't this kind of like reflected in the movie and the whole like, yeah, it was just kind of very weird. So I walked out, I was like, this is a movie I will one day watch again on Disney Plus, and that's kind of it. I don't it's not as bad as, in my opinion, Thor: Love and Thunder, which I was like, I don't really ever want to watch this movie again, or at least soon, like maybe in a couple of years I'll go back to it, but I'll happily watch this movie again. It's just not something I wanted to rush back to the theater for. I guess that's kind of the metric here.
Brad, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Mitch and Steve said. Not a whole lot to add. I think the movie's just a big mess, and not even an interesting mess in some of the other ways that some of the other MCU movies are. Like, even we can get more into it later, but like, at least like for me, something like Age of Ultron, which I think is a fair comparison, there was a lot of like interesting character work in there. Particularly, like, I can think of like the party scene and the farm stuff. Like, there's a lot of interesting character stuff there, but I feel like even that is lacking in Quantumania. There's not really a lot here that I really care for. Obviously, we'll talk more about Kang. He's really the only part of this movie that I really cared for. And there's just a lot of like interesting plot threads that were right there that they just didn't explore at all. And we'll get more into that later. And it just, yeah, I was really disappointed. Like, I mean, I wasn't going into an Ant-Man movie expecting it to be, like a Winter Soldier or an Endgame or Infinity War or that kind of thing. But like, I was hoping it would be, in the same way that Winter Soldier kind of like kickstarted Cap for a lot of people, and how, Thor Ragnarok won over a lot of people with Thor, kind of hoping that would be like this for Ant-Man, to kind of make him like a big player. Because obviously he was in Endgame and he had a big part in that, but he's not really beloved on the level of some of those other characters. I was kind of hoping this would be that for him, and it wasn't at all.
Yeah, I think for me going into this, I was hoping that this movie was going to be that breakout moment, but for Catherine Newton's Cassie Lang. I wanted to see
Yeah, I have a lot to say about her.
Stature or Stinger be this character
Right.
you want to follow, you want to understand where this character is going, because they are setting up these threads of young Avengers throughout a few of the Disney Plus properties and now a couple of movies. And honestly, I know how I feel, but Griffin, how did you feel about Cassie and
is
just
one of
about the
main
movie in
things
general?
I want to talk about with this movie, because like for me,
I have a lot to say about her.
I actually really enjoyed this movie. This is not a good movie.
No.
Like it is a mess. I still had a lot of fun with it. There came a point where I don't consider the plot to be bad. I consider the plot to be ridiculous. And that can go many different ways depending on who you are watching that movie. For me, it got to a point where it became so ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh at it. Both at some of the fucking hilarious jokes, frankly, for some of them, particularly with one of the quantumverse beings. You guys know
which one? Because do you remember the names of any of them? Because
please tell me.
Because it was a weird ass name. That's the only reason I don't remember.
Well, they only said they maybe said their
Holes
character
guy?
names once.
Holes guy. Yeah. That's
I
the
only know
official
him
we're
because
going.
I only know him because he's voiced by David Dastmalchian, who also played Kurt in the other Ant-Man movies. That's the only reason why I remember that character. But otherwise, I to Mitch's point.
I remembered Quaz. I remembered Gentora. I remembered Kryler. Like I did remember.
You could be
some of
making
those.
these up, except for
Kryler is
You're better than I am.
Like
Yeah.
Kryler is the only one that stuck with me, and that's only because Michelle Pfeiffer or Janet Van Dyne said Lord Kryler's name like 17 times in the span of 2 minutes.
Look,
Because you're meant to remember that Bill Murray's character's name was Kryler, even though he's on screen for all of 5 minutes.
For what it's worth,
See, the reason I remember that name was because it rhymed with Skyler from Breaking Bad, and I was like, oh, keep that up here. Little name recognition.
This is a big issue with that, but it's also an issue with not just Marvel. It's kind of an issue with most sci-fi stuff of, hey, I don't really care about these characters. You said their name in passing. I'm not going to remember it. The only place I ever actually do remember that kind of stuff is Star Wars, because nerds will beat it into you what people's names are. But no, with this, I liked some of the plot points. I think it had a lot of really fun moments. And I did like the motivations. Like, I did genuinely like this movie until about 2/3 through the movie, where the cart comes before the horse. Where they're like, we have to end this. This is a movie that has to end. We need to figure out how to end it. And it's so clear the ending was rewritten a few different times. Like,
ending this movie is just impossible because you're ending it on the threat of Kang, and Kang is going to be this threat over the next 4 years, whatever the timeline is. I think 2026 is Secret Wars, but now there's conversations about splitting that into 2 movies. So I feel like it's going to stretch out for sure.
With the delays, which is a very good thing. Delaying these things is very good. It's going to help with the Marvel fatigue that we've been talking about for months. Frankly, probably years at this point.
We should talk about this because it's the first time that we've done an episode since Marvel announced the release date of The Marvels, now coming out in November.
It looks so good.
The poster is awesome. Haunted Mansion taking its spot in the summer. Thank God that movie is going to be so good. I cannot wait to watch that movie. And also them saying, the only things that they're confirming for this year are Secret Invasion and Loki season 2 on Disney Plus. The rest of it is sort of TBD, which I think is the right approach because Marvel fatigue is real at this point.
Oh yeah, and I think they're recognizing that. I think they're putting us in a good position, especially with it's like, okay, so the big things coming out now are Guardians, the Marvels, Secret Invasion, and Loki. That's it for this one. They're probably going to delay Ironheart, but they haven't officially said it yet. But that's also because
that's already wrapped. That's wrapped shooting at this point, right?
Yeah, but I can imagine them delaying it so that Ironheart can actually get her time in the sun.
No,
because that's a character that deserves it, especially with what it sounds like some of the things they're going to do with that show. But bringing it back to Ant-Man and the Wasp, because I promise I will finish my point. It'd be ridiculously long-winded because that's just who I am. I'm sorry. It felt like they had a lot of good ideas. I feel like there was a coherent version of this movie at one point. And it feels like there was a coherent version of this movie that featured Cassie a lot more. If I'm really being honest. I feel like the original cut of this movie probably had different endings for some of these characters and setting up Cassie as a bigger person in this universe, but that's not what we got. What we got was kind of interesting, fun for the most part for me, but ultimately ended in a very, very weird and kind of disappointing way.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
those
there was
post-credit scenes popped
definitely.
off.
Oh yeah, the post-credit scenes were awesome. I think there was definitely some plot points that were revisited because I mean, earlier trailers we got for this movie sort of hinted at the whole idea of Scott wanting more time with Cassie, having missed those
Right.
5 years of her life, and Kang like being able to provide that, which really wasn't the case when we got to what we got in the movie. And I feel like I'm getting dangerously close to spoilers, so I don't want to say much more.
Let's go ahead and
So we're still.
let's hit the spoiler warning. Folks, if you haven't and you want to see it, go watch the movie. Come on back. We are going to be talking full spoilers from here on out. Should we just start with the weird ending? I feel like we should start with just the weird ending for this movie.
Yeah. Kang getting pulled into the probability matrix, whatever matrix of leadership, whatever we want to call the thing.
Multiversal core, I believe, is what they
Sure.
called it.
Kang's not dead, even though
No.
the council, which we'll get to that because that was dope, but like he's not dead, and I really feel like this film is probably setting up that variant of Kang to be the MCU's Beyonder.
Yeah.
You'll get to a point where he's discovered, everything about the universe and sets up the events of Secret Wars. But yeah, like it felt like the stakes were there with Hope finally doing something in the movie because she'd been kind of calling this Ant-Man and the Wasp. This isn't an Ant-Man and the Wasp movie.
If you're saying that it's the Wasp, it's Janet who is the title.
Right.
Of the Wasp.
Well, yeah, exactly. But like having Hope do something at the end there, which looked like it almost looked, and I want to see it again and compare them side by side. I feel like they might have just reused footage from the bar fight scene of when she was like blasting people with her stingers. It looked almost identical in that scene. So I wonder if they just stitch the footage together, but like adding the stakes of, okay, they're stuck. Oh no, Cassie was able to rebuild the portal thing in the span of 30 seconds. Here's your happy ending. And that ending of Scott walking down the street was reshot a month before the film released. So
it's funny, like I didn't even mind like Cassie reopening the portal. Like I would have loved to see that because that was something that's like kind of set up at the beginning of this movie. If I had this, I would have been able to find you. But actually have it take time. Actually have the stakes there. Like I think the thing that really annoyed me about that ending in particular was Scott's gonna die. Scott didn't die. Oh, Scott and Hope are gonna be stranded in the Quantumverse, and we're going to have Cassie step into this role as the main, I guess, Ant-Man in quotes.
Ant-based hero.
Growy, shrinky hero in the MCU, and I would have really loved to see that. No, we just got Paul Rudd coming back and giving a weird, did we really win? Did we not?
That whole
It
existential
doesn't matter.
crisis was kind of funny until they just shrug it off.
Yeah.
I think it's weird that like nobody died. Like I'm happy with Scott not dying. I thought Janet was gonna die at some point because she's got a history with Kang. She was in the very first scene of the movie. She's been here a lot, throughout the movie. I thought either she would maybe sacrifice herself so they could escape and Kang, which I think even would have been a little better than him getting beaten by two C-list heroes in his first movie. That was like, I feel like if they like just escape by like the nick of their teeth sort of thing, and he's still out there or whatever, I feel like that would have at least been a little more satisfying than just him getting wrecked like that. Like, and I know you could kind of say, oh, the ants damaged his suit and he was weakened, blah blah blah, but like still, it's not satisfying. I mean, you consider like he's supposed to be like the Thanos level villain, right? Thanos' first real introduction in the first 5 minutes basically kills all of the Asgardians, kills Heimdall, kills Loki, wrecks the Hulk, and I'm like, and then the only reason that we even still have a chance is because Banner manages to escape, and I love that, and I feel like I'm not saying I would have wanted a 1-to-1 sort of thing like that with Kang, but like if someone died and like Scott barely escaped, and then he's sort of like Strange, where like there's a bigger threat out there and he's a little more concerned about it, but it felt like there are absolutely no stakes. Nobody died. They escaped. And then he just laughs about it in the end. It's like,
and
so what?
And it's not that thinks this. I don't think that's the Kang we're getting as our big bad. I think the big bad we are getting within the Kang stuff is the Council of Kangs, which,
right.
being honest, is significantly more interesting to me.
Sure.
I mean, except for the weird accents. Like that.
But I still feel like, regardless of whatever Kang we get, for our first introduction to a Kang who's supposed to be so powerful, they showed brief scenes of him like conquering, you know, and then he just gets owned by Scott and Hope is just
See,
a little
I
underwhelming.
don't
I
mind
think.
them beating him because like it's a
No.
superhero movie. The heroes typically win. That is a basic normal thing. And I know we have Infinity War. I know we have movies where the heroes actually lose. Like that's the whole point of Civil War, right?
Yeah, I mean,
It's
this
not a
this felt to
very
me like it should have
satisfying
been a movie where
introduction.
they. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say I hear your point, but to me, like that's not a very satisfying introduction to this big villain. Then, if he's already lost in his first outing, what you were gonna say, Mitch, yeah, this feels like it should have been a movie where they did lose, or at least even if they beat him, that someone died for it. Like the fact that again that they get off, no pun intended, scot free is
See, I didn't mind
a
that
little weird to me.
King ended up like dying because I do feel like to Mitch's point, I do feel like we are leading up to something like a Beyonder, and X. By the time we get to Secret Wars, that this ending in particular will kind of pay off in dividends. But that being said, 100%, I think that setting up a Kang the Conqueror, we should have seen him conquer something or had the stakes of like a Janet or a Hank dying in the process of it, because otherwise I feel like by the time we got to everyone going through the portal and then the portal shrinking, I was like, okay, there's the stakes. Even though it's kind of a cop out, we're putting Ant-Man back into a weird realm and stranding him again. Okay, this is just the ending of Ant-Man 2 or whatever. Then it opens up again and he goes through. I was like, oh, so we're literally just letting everyone walk away. That's kind of strange for a movie like this, but
Yeah, that's my gripe as well. It's like there are no stakes.
no.
Like Kang should be defeated in my opinion, because the whole
I
point
agree.
of Kang is that you can defeat him as many times as you want, but he keeps coming back.
And I think that's going to play into Loki season 2, maybe Fantastic Four, and then et cetera, is that Jonathan Majors is just going to keep coming back over and over again. It's going to be hammered onto the audience like, oh, you can throw as many heroes as you want as this, but look at the post-credit sequence. How many there were. Like, this is just a threat that's not going away. And I think that's much scarier than Thanos coming in and just wrecking shop with Loki and Heimdall.
To take it a step further, and Mitch, I'll let you go in a second. I think that's what separates Kang from Thanos.
Right.
Like, a lot of people talking right now is like, oh, Kang's motivations are he wants less superheroes. That's what Thanos wanted too. First off, that's not what Thanos wanted.
No, that's not.
But Kang's entire thing is exactly that. Superheroes shouldn't exist. He needs to eradicate them because they fuck up all of his plans. And with that, Kang is relentless in his attacks. He just keeps coming. Some of the best stories of Kang are, oh, we beat him. Oh, he's immediately back. Because time does not matter to this man. And I think we are setting that up to see Kang pop up elsewhere before the Kang Dynasty. I don't know where. I don't know what half of the shit we're about to be getting in the MCU is going. But I do think Kang is going to be popping up here and there, and I think that's what's going to make Kang an interesting villain by the time we get to Kang Dynasty.
Yeah, I will echo that, in that I feel like Kang will be a more significant threat to the Avengers when he is not bound to the construct of being trapped outside of space and time within the quantum realm. That is where Kang gets his power from. It's from time. It's from understanding the events that are all to come, and that's where the real threat is going to be. The bigger problem that I had with Kang in this movie, and Jonathan Majors absolutely demands every microsecond that he's on screen. He's phenomenal. They cast the right actor in this role, but they set him up as he's got lasers that literally evaporate everything in front of him, and then he chooses to not use them against the ants, and they're conveniently destroyed before he fights Ant-Man and the Wasp. And it's just those plot conveniences. While suspension of disbelief is a thing, and it's all for the having to weave this story across the next 7 or 8 movies across 3 or 4 years is it's fatiguing, and they need to stretch it out. So I understand why they needed to establish that Kang can lose when bound to the construct of being outside space and time, but it's just the inconsistencies there in terms of the power level of Kang, even within the quantum realm with his suit, was okay. And now the ants are going to attack his bubble, so then the bubble's going to make it so they overrun him and destroy his suit. He had lasers that evaporated everything.
But Mitch, he also went up against MODOK, who is not a dick.
Can we talk about that? Because that was probably the weakest character in the entire film for me.
I keep saying this movie is ridiculous. MODOK was the stupidest, most ridiculous part of this movie that I could not stop laughing at. Not because it was funny, but because it was terrible.
It was so inconsistent with the character and every other media we've seen him introduced in. I've recently been watching Avengers Assemble, as much as people don't like that for being the first post-Disney Avengers show. MODOK in there is realistically a threat and realistically terrifying. Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, the personification of MODOK there was really good. Even the Avengers video game that we got a couple of years ago, MODOK in that game feels like a significant threat. They established, he is this techno wizard, controls everything thing. And here it's just, they put really bad Corey Stoll big face CGI on this bodysuit and redeem him at the end with one of the least redeemable scenes in the history of the MCU. Of this to me feels like worse use of a Marvel character than Claw in the Black Panther movie.
See, I
without a doubt.
I still like the humor of this character because like MODOK is an inherently ridiculous character. Like the giant,
I think for
giant
me,
head, the baby legs, the baby arms. Like every
The
time
butt.
I've read this character, he is used in the stupidest ways possible. Like one of my favorite uses of him is that he's essentially just a CEO for bad guys. Like
I don't disagree with any of that. I just feel like he didn't belong in this movie. Like it created a lot of tonal whiplash where Kang again brings a bit of a darker tone, and his scenes kind of had that gravitas to them. But then immediately after, you've got this goofy guy that really feels like he more in the last two Ant-Man movies. Like I just feel like I'm not opposed to this rendition of MODOK necessarily. I just feel like he felt out of place in a Kang movie.
They also had to have like a minute of flashbacks to remind everyone, hey, remember this guy from the first Ant-Man movie that everyone kind of really didn't like because it wasn't a very well thought out villain and was the same thing that Marvel has done this whole way through. Of the villain is just a copy of the hero, but with an additional like blaster or something. Well, it's that guy again. Look, and it's just like they didn't trust the audience enough to know that without those flashbacks, and it's that. Like it just irked me in a way I can't really put my finger on it, but it just
The flashback moment was still funny to me when Scott just totally cuts him off.
Sure, that was a good moment.
That was funny
because it's very much they recognized that this character was ridiculous and dumb, and they tried to play with that, and it just didn't work.
Yeah. The one thing I will say though about MODOK's introduction and how they show the flashback of him going into like the quantum realm and ending up in the void and everything is the payoff to that weird yellow jacket helmet that they put into Loki when they show the void, and everyone's like, "Oh, why is that helmet there?" I was like, "Oh, cool! Finally, we get like a concrete answer that it wasn't just for random sake. It was actually for a purpose." So I always like when the MCU does that.
Yeah, this is really just a 2-hour trailer for Loki season 2.
Oh yeah,
right. Like that. It's made me want to see more of Kang in the MCU. We understand that the next time that'll happen is likely to be Loki season 2. I don't see there being anything before that unless it's a post-credit scene and something before that. But it's disappointing. I mean, I'm really excited to get more Loki. I know Griffin and I have our disagreements about the first season, but I have a lot of faith that this second season can redeem some of the things Griffin didn't like in the first one.
Can I yell about it?
And
please just say my words. Loki season 1 sucks. It's terrible. Absolute garbage. Okay, I'm done now.
Okay, that's a whole terrible take right there.
Wow.
As you sit here praising Quantumania?
The Loki Sylvie thing wasn't.
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
That's really the big thing for Griffin. But that being said, like I feel like I need to see more of Kang because Jonathan Majors just demands a presence when he's on screen, and I think this is going to come to fruition because we know we're getting Kang Dynasty, albeit they got to figure out a way to do that without those accents, because every time Jonathan Majors put some sort, like, I understand the different characters having to, have different personifications, but just like Immortus was, no, it wasn't good. I don't need Jonathan Majors doing a Dark Knight impression for any of these voices.
Mark my words, those three particular Kangs are just gonna disappear, so we don't have to hear those accents.
Oh,
again.
guaranteed, no way.
They can't though, because those are the three most important Kangs on the Council of Kangs, with Rama Tut, Immortus, and some rendition of the Crimson
Scarlet
Centurion.
What they can do
very
is
important.
You can do what they did with Scarlet Witch, where just Elizabeth Olsen's accent just vanishes over the movies, and
Yeah.
they
They'll have
don't
to
address
retcon
it at
that
all.
I hope so.
through.
Because Mitch, you were talking about the scene where, you know, Paul Rudd's walking down the street and he's kind of mulling over himself like, oh, did we win or whatever. I'm pretty sure that the post-credit scene of the Council of Kings, that was also a reshoot that was added nearly by the finish line before this movie came out. So I wouldn't be shocked if they were like, you know what, Jonathan Majors, throw on a couple accents, play around with the characters, but once we get to Kang Dynasty, he'll have an idea of like how to flesh out these characters,
What
because
the actual personification of these different variants needs
exactly,
to be,
because I do think it's a very difficult task to throw a character in and be like, okay, well, you've already done He Who Remains, you're doing Kang in this movie, you have, you know, Victor Timely, I guess, in this second post-credit sequence, and then you got 3 more major ones. So just figure it out before this movie comes out, because we need it.
And
I
honestly,
also think all these rewrites are coming because Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars are being written right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of it. And I think it may also have to do, and I know we're probably still too close to it to feel the ripples of the change in leadership at Disney, but the replacement of Bob Chapek as CEO, having Bob Iger come back, and the interviews that he's been giving and the ones that Kevin Feige have been giving recently about the oversaturation of Marvel properties, about putting things out too quickly. I feel like a lot of those business decisions were Chapek decisions and not Bob Iger decisions.
Yeah. The practically ignoring half of Cassie's character very much felt like a Chapek decision.
Oh my God, yeah.
Cassie has one of my favorite introductions in general with this movie. Like when we see her in jail.
Oh, sure.
That's
like,
awesome.
Let's just get right
Yeah.
to the point. She's a
And then,
leftist
but there are
activist
parallels.
superhero.
But there are parallels to that in the quantum realm with the quantum people, and they kind of mention it,
Ignore it.
and then don't go back to it at all.
Like they could have
Like,
made an interesting story with that. And for what it's
Like,
worth,
I thought Cassie was going to stay in the quantum realm and help them resettle by the end of this movie, and then there was just nothing.
No, just nothing.
She gets to
Well,
celebrate
I
a
mean,
birthday that she didn't have with hair that is
I'll
very
even-
clearly longer than it was in the rest of the movie. Like,
I'll go one step further. Even her introduction, her real introduction as like teenage Cassie, came in Endgame, and that was one of the best scenes of that movie. I
Mhm.
love that. That was the sort of emotion and heart that I was hoping would come into this movie, where, like you said, you know, they were setting up this idea that he lost 5 years with her, and that's a really interesting idea. And that was actually something that, you know, Wakanda Forever was going to tackle before Chadwick passed, so we couldn't get that story there. So I thought maybe we'd get it here. The idea of a parent lamenting the time that they lost with their child. That's a really interesting idea, especially because a lot of MCU characters aren't fathers. They themselves, they usually have daddy issues instead. So I thought the idea of exploring that from, you know, Scott's perspective was so interesting. And I thought, you know, if more of the movie was about the two of them, like sort of a father-daughter relationship, like I feel like one of my biggest issues with this movie structurally is that it has to involve the other characters and keep cutting back to them, when really, does anyone really care about Hope? Does anyone really care about Hank or Janet? Like that felt like a whole separate thing. Like I would have been happy to leave them behind and just focus more on Scott and Cassie, and then their relationship with Kang as well, because I feel like other MCU movies can get away with cutting back and forth, like Guardians or Civil War or Infinity War, because you care about all those characters. But when I don't care about like half of the Ant family, like when you keep cutting back to them, there's a whole cantina scene. Bill Murray's a whole character. I don't care about any of
What
that.
about
Like,
one of the most
I just wanted to-
forgettable characters in this movie?
Oh, sure.
yeah, it's like there was so much potential there to have, you know, Scott exploring the fact that, you know, catching up with his daughter, realizing what he missed with her, you know, kind of reconciling that. There's like one line where she's, you know, she says she's disappointed in him when they're there, and then there's
Joke.
you know, yeah, there's like a joke about, oh, she's been in prison more times than he knew about, sort of thing. Like it's very surface level, and like there's a lot of interesting stuff there that they could have done, and I was really disappointed that, you know, I'm the daddy issues guy. I love that kind of story material. And I just feel with having
well, and
it with
they
Scott and his
hinted it
daughter.
too. Like, there's that scene where they're in the
Huh.
car. And she's like, "Well, you haven't been around." He's like, "Oh, that hurts." I'm like, "Yeah, that's something
was
that
one of the best
could have been
scenes in the movie
explored."
to me.
It
Yeah.
was, and then they completely break out of it by being like, "Oh, let's find out that, you know, Scott's been listening to his own audiobook while he drives around and talking
Yeah.
about whether or not when he was a baby, if he was the Hulk's baby or not, and just casually introducing the fact that time travel is a real thing that can happen within the world, and that isn't something that completely destroyed all, you know, scientific discovery and you know, people's
See, even with the audiobook bit, because I do think that was funny. I thought that scene entirely was one of the best moments of the entire movie. Seeing Cassie, seeing that relationship. I like though that they were still like they still very clearly love each other. They've gone through this. They've talked this through already. I would have loved to see it, but it's one of those things that I really try not to judge these movies based off of what we didn't get. And see what
sure.
we did.
For
So
me,
what
like
we did
they were
get-
setting that up. So like if I hear you, like I normally don't criticize things for what we didn't get, but when that was so clearly set up at the beginning as like what should have been like the main conflict for that character, like his arc, them sort of reconciling, and then they don't explore it, like to me that is a pretty big issue.
Oh yeah,
Like,
no, and I think
if they just
I
didn't
really do
have
think
that
this character
at
had a
all,
different
like I wouldn't.
I think this character had an entirely
Yeah.
different ending planned out. Like this and Love and Thunder are kind of two I put into this weird category of the rewrites are really fucking obvious.
Yeah, and I think
they were. I really do think that with Cassie, they were going to originally lean into this activist superhero role because we don't have someone like that currently in the MCU. We really should. It could be really, really interesting, especially with some of the stuff that you can do with that, especially right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even being in Toronto when she talked about like the homeless encampments and the police breaking them down and everything, I was like, oh, I
happened here last summer.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
it
like
happened
down
just
the
around the corner
street.
for me and everything. But my problem, and we're talking about things that the movie didn't do or anything, but I feel like this is a very critical point. Is that they bring that up, then they bring the whole thing of like, oh, Scott, you've been doing like these book tours and everything. When are you going to start saving people? And between the two major characters, which I would think are Scott and Cassie, like they don't really have any growth in this movie. They don't have an arc. Please explain to me like any character, even the secondary ones, they don't really do anything in this movie. Like by the time they come out, they're not different people at all. I think maybe Janet, there's an argument maybe that she
Like she's maybe a
learned
more
to
beef
open
now,
up.
but
Yeah,
I mean Janet's plot throughout this film was fairly interesting of keeping these secrets from her family, not divulging everything that happened when she was in the quantum realm because one, it could break their brains, and two, she wanted to protect them from what she knew was down there, expecting that it would never be a thing again. And then obviously it becomes a thing. But it's just to Brad's point, it's so hard not to criticize this movie when it's so obvious that it was trying to take characters in a certain direction and they ended up in the same place that they started.
Well, and the I don't like the first two anime movies. Like I don't obviously hold them like high up in the MCU, but like one of the strongest parts of those movies are like the cute little heart scenes he has with his daughter. Like his whole arc in the first movie is being a better man for his daughter. I think there's literally a line that Hank says to him where he's like, don't you want to be the man that your daughter already thinks you are, sort of thing. And it just given the material of the last two movies, like it's literally Scott like trying to be back with his daughter, and same thing in the second movie, like, he's literally under house arrest. Like it just everything in these movies has built up to him having like a true like story focused around him and his daughter as like more equals, because she was obviously like a little girl, she couldn't be a superhero in the other movies. um
but what
and yeah,
about that scene where they're sitting like I think it's right next to her bed or whatever, and she's like, "I can be your sidekick or whatever."
I can be your partner.
Exactly. It's like they weren't really partners in this movie. Like Scott was trying to be the hero, sure, but Cassie didn't
had
really
like
feel
one he had like one cute scene where he's like, oh, you
and
shrink and
tap.
then punch, or whatever it's called.
yeah, shrink and tap or whatever.
Yeah, which is like kind of cute, but like other than that, there's like there's like nothing there.
I feel
which
like
is
every
unfortunate.
scene that Scott had with Cassie in the first two Ant-Man movies and in Endgame, there was so much like the chemistry was real. It was palpable between, Paul and Abby, who played young Cassie, and then with the actor who played teenage Cassie in Endgame. And I just didn't feel that same connection here with Catherine Newton's Cassie. Unfortunately, there were some moments, but like Catherine Newton is a fantastic actor. I think she's really funny, especially if you haven't seen Cock Blockers, which she started.
Oh my
that
god,
movie
yes.
is so goddamn funny. I just feel like her character was
too. She's
overly
really good in that.
rewritten here, and it led to a weaker portrayal of this character who's incredibly strong, like an incredibly strong woman and a strong character in the comics, and it sort of fell flat for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, for me, I actually did really I really love Catherine Newton in this role. I actually did really fall in love with this character because of her. but it wasn't in those moments in the Quantumverse. It was all the stuff at the beginning and the end of the movie. Like, the Quantumverse stuff was really great, and I did like seeing her come into her own, but all of the points where she's coming into her own don't involve Scott at all.
Yeah.
Like, it is the moments with Gentora having to do the message or fighting
Right.
MODOK, which I actually thought was, given, what we've got in the MCU, was actually kind of a great moment for her, of her having to fight the dude that showed up in a bee costume when she was 6. Like, I really did like that stuff.
It is kind of odd though that like when he reveals his face, she's like, "Oh my god, that's the bee guy." When did she ever see his face in that movie?
He took his helmet
Thank
off.
you so much.
One of the
Did they?
Yeah,
No,
one of the,
he didn't, 'cause
one
he
of the flashbacks they
oh,
showed
yeah, he,
was
like-
literally him taking his helmet off in her room,
Yeah.
Okay, I missed
which
that.
I'm not sure happened in the movie. for
Yeah.
what
I
it's
think he
worth.
did that in the
say-
original movie.
But they definitely showed
Okay.
it in the flashback.
Gotcha.
They probably only showed it in the flashback to try and, remind you that this character
On it.
was Yellow Jacket. And
Right.
it's just like
But like, obviously, I would have really loved to see Emma Furman in this role. I mean, it sucks what they did to her. At no fault of Catherine Newton. Like,
no.
there was no communication there. This was just stupid business decisions. But I did really like Catherine Newton's character. It's a character I cannot wait to see more of, and it's a character I think needs to stand on her own.
Agreed.
Aside from Ant-Man, like, the reason that character is interesting, the reason she is such a powerful character, comic-wise, is because she has to deal with the loss of her dad, and she does that by being the superhero, by taking his place. And then eventually he comes back and she dies, and it's a whole thing. Look, we don't need to adapt comic books 1-to-1. That's all I'm saying. But it was such a fascinating version of that character. For me, it just felt like there was some final iota, maybe somewhere in the middle, that was missing for this character within the writing. And I feel like it was, I feel like it was originally there that just ended up getting cut.
It was a movie similar to Love and Thunder. Honestly, I think that both of these movies, like we've been saying, had significant story left on the cutting room floor. And it just feels like both of these movies could have used another 15, 20, 30 minutes to build out those characters and give us a more satisfying conclusion to what needs to be a standalone story. It's great to have these sort of, like, this felt very much like a comic serial or like a single episode of one of those Avengers shows I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Of there really aren't stakes to it, but it's a fun story. Like there's interesting stuff that's happening, but by the end there's no consequence, and then we're ready to pick up the next story next week. And I don't want us to start to feel this way about what should be a self-contained Hollywood blockbuster production that needs to have a satisfying beginning, middle, and end.
I think
felt
a
On
lot of
your
it
point-
for me, like to the notion that I kind of walked away with and feeling nothing was largely, a lot of it was just because we're in the quantum realm, and a lot of it just didn't feel relatable. I had nothing to attach to. We're talking about like the secondary characters, not even knowing their names or anything like that. And you talking about Love and Thunder and that comparison between the two, this movie made me bring up the gripes again about Marvel's use of the volume as like a crutch for them. And I really wish they would just get over this technology, because I just don't find it to be all that helpful. I understand that there are perks for it, but
We're all
Yeah.
looking forward to Mando in like
I
2
don't
weeks.
think the issue was the volume. I think the issue was how they used the Quantumverse writing-wise. Because the Quantumverse
Sure.
looked cool. The problem is that you can only look at something for about 5 to 10 minutes before it starts
Sure.
to become normal.
yeah.
Well, and
Well, I
it's
think
also just
someone
like
brought
visual overload. Like they're pushing all of this really interesting all these interesting locales, all this interesting design of the quantum realm. That's fine for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, but to have an entire movie take place within what was essentially a CGI set for probably 90% of this movie is, at the end of the day, difficult to look at. And I feel like this movie is not going to age particularly well, just
And that's what I
because
wanted
of
to get to.
how
Yeah.
much of it takes place in the quantum realm.
Well, yeah, and someone brought up, I forget who I saw, I don't know if it was a review or a tweet or something, but with the other times we've seen Scott, it's been in real settings, so we have things to compare his powers to. So like when he's fighting in the airport, when he goes large in Civil War and grabs Rhodey and whatever, we can compare him to a plane. In the Ant-Man and the Wasp, when he's in San Francisco, we can compare him to the boat that he's grabbing. Same thing in Endgame or whatever. But like, don't really like. There's the scene where Scott and Cassie both get large, and
Yeah,
like
that
I
was the moment.
Yep.
like
Yep.
it was like
stupid.
it looked like they're just regular size because I had like
Yep.
nothing human, nothing tangible. It was all CG.
And that was the exact
There was
moment
no
where it
other
made me
character
go,
in the
like, we need to
scenes.
move aside from this because everything just kind of melds into like one CGI mess. I was
Yeah,
like, are they big still? Oh, they're still big, I guess. Because the
you
movie's
can tell
and that
because
yeah.
they bring out the shot to very clearly show a smaller building.
right.
and like the idea of just father and
but
the idea of them like
still
having a heart-to-heart father-daughter moment super big in this like city is kind of amusing, but there's like it doesn't really land because it's like what am I even looking at?
it's a
No
moment
frame
that
of
should
reference
feel
for it,
amazing.
yeah.
It is a moment that should feel like like the emotional heart of the movie, and because of the weird CG around it, whether that is the volume, whether that's the scaling, it just takes away from that.
And I think to the, a negative here is that you have the movie take place all within the quantum realm and everything, and then the movie kind of sidelines a whole bunch of secondary characters that were established across two movies. Like I know that we still have David, I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm not gonna.
Dalmatian.
In as a voice actor and everything. But even at the end where they're doing like Cassie's made up birthday to
Birthday.
like make and everything, I was like, where are her parents? Like,
Where's
Or
Luis? Because
where's
Luis is the
Luis?
best character in the Ant-Man movies.
Like you got
They brought
Randall
back-
Park in. Yeah.
Yeah, they brought Randall
Doesn't
Park
give him
and they
a-
brought back the Baskin Robbins
Robbins dude.
manager dude from the first
Twice.
movie. They brought him
Twice.
back multiple times. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't even get a cameo from Michael Pena to say some fun like
No,
that was some
and
of the comedy that worked really well and was
and
very
earlier
unique
in the
to
movie,
Ant-Man.
they're all having dinner, and Cassie says to Hank, like, she called him grandpa and everything. I was like, where is this
See, I love that.
action
I actually
coming
legitimately
from?
loved that. That whole.
I
dinner
was
scene
super
great.
confused because it broke my brain for a second. I was like, this isn't
Like,
your grandfather.
It
Like, why is
makes
she
sense.
calling that?
It does legit
But like
make
Hope and
sense.
Scott aren't married. Like
No.
So here's the thing. I
It was
come
just like a bunch of like
I-
weird dynamics that I was just like,
For me,
I don't like
I
this.
come from a family where it is very much. I have people who are not at all my biological grandparents, no way, shape, or form. That I still call
For
grandma
sure.
and grandpa. So that was something that I was like, cool.
I
got
don't
it.
know.
They are
I get
essentially
that.
grandparent figures to
They're-
her at this
yeah.
point. We never
are they?
saw any of it, but it's
Yeah.
something
We never
that
saw
makes
any of
sense to
it.
happen.
That's the
And,
more
like-
difficult thing of all of this to wrap your head around is like she studied quantum physics when they were all blipped away. She read his book. She read Grandpa Hank's books. But like for her to then have come back and within a year and a half, I don't know what the time frame is between Endgame and this, but have developed all of this quantum technology in a basement, and like Hank giving her serious kudos for that. And I think it's awesome to establish Cassie as this really smart character in a Marvel universe that now is missing one Robert Downey Jr., but you have geniuses in Shuri, in Ironheart, and now with Cassie. I love that they're setting up some really strong, smart figures, especially knowing Reed Richards is right around the corner, which we'll talk about as well when it comes to that Council of Kang scene.
And I want to ask you guys something because you brought it up, like the difference in time between Endgame and this movie. Is anyone else kind of on the same boat that this could be happening like right before Kang Dynasty? Because I don't feel like there's anything. I don't think there's anything tying this to like the current kind of placement where the MCU is taking place. I wonder if they're going to kind of push it.
I don't think any of Phase, but I shouldn't say any. I would say most of Phase 4 has been like, oh, this could really show up anytime after the blip.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see when it drops on Disney Plus where it fits in the timeline order,
Right.
especially as more stuff comes out. Because to your point, this very much felt like I was saying earlier, this felt like a single serial from a comic series that could fit in anywhere between Endgame and Kang Dynasty, or at least Loki season 2, which also takes place out of time, so it could literally take place at any point. So we don't really know.
Yeah, we'll learn eventually. It's probably going to be one of those things of because quantum burst time is weird. Oh,
Yeah, maybe
it
they
took
were
place
gone
over,
for like 3.5 years, but they didn't mention it because all their hair changed while they were in the quantum. Like we get that scene at the end, and like Hope's hair is entirely. I'm sorry to go back on the hair thing, but like it's very clearly reshot. Hope's hair is different. Cassie's hair is different. People look different in that end scene versus how they looked throughout the entirety of a 2-hour movie. It broke my brain in ways I didn't want to get broken.
Can we go back to the early like dinner scene for a second? Because I do want to talk about the grandma
Pizza night?
Yeah, because there's one moment in it that I really, really did love. of their, it's either the first or the second moment where she very specifically says Grandpa Hank, where Hank and Janet just look at each other and smile.
Yeah, that was cute.
And it was like, it's one of those things of like, that's the stuff that I really think was good in this movie. There's a lot of like very little subtle moments like that aren't
Or even
in the
just
writing,
that
that
wasn't
aren't
earned,
in the
though.
design and stuff.
Yeah.
It is these actors acting.
I think Hope's best scene is also here, where she tries to get her mom to open up a little bit more about what happened in the quantum realm. Just like, she's just like, oh, it's just so nice to be with everyone. It's like those character moments can add gravity to the situation that happens in the quantum realm, but it largely goes unnoticed when we get there. And it is just, hey, I heard you're good at stealing stuff. I need you to steal a thing.
Mhm.
The classic Ant-Man story.
Yeah, which we've already seen at this point.
Twice.
Trying to remember. Yeah, I was trying to remember if and the Wasp also involved the heist, and it did. So it's just like, we don't need the same movie a third time. Add those stakes. We care about these characters. A character dies, and we care. A character is put in an unbelievably difficult situation, and we care. The stakes just aren't there.
I do think the performances are there, though. That's kind of what I was driving at there. Of like, some of these performances are damn good. Like, obviously, Jonathan Majors as Kang is fantastic. Like, he rules that role very well. In seeing it, we saw it with him as the
He who remains.
Thank you. He who remains of this like more out there, significantly more scientist role, and then we see
Goofy, almost like goofy eccentric who's been trapped at the end of time.
kind of slowly losing his mind. Then we see him here in this more restrained, I guess, is probably not the best word, but it's the only word I can think of.
Yeah, I think that's
like army general, like role, almost like military feeling.
But also manipulative in a
Yeah.
very, very interesting way. Like everything between him and Janet in the past.
Oh my God.
scenes was so good.
There's that one scene where after she touches the quantum
the
ball or whatever.
multiversal core.
Yeah.
The tiny whiny ball.
And then he looked at her and he's like, we could just go home. I love that entire scene of like, he's just like,
he's like, I'll leave your Earth alone. Just let me out. Yeah, I just need to get out. I'll leave you alone. You'll be fine. Yeah. Hope will never know.
Exactly. I love that stuff.
When she says, who is Kang? And his response is, who I have to be.
Right.
Like,
oh my God.
Chills. But, and that was one of the other performances I actually really loved was Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer is fantastic in this movie.
Huh? Also, Michael Douglas being Michael Douglas, but Michael Douglas is.
But again, Michael Douglas just being like, they have this whole back and forth of like, that guy really is like, I was down here, I had needs, and they have this whole thing. Like, there's some funny bits in there. She's like, she wasn't you. Like, there's some nice moments, but like, ultimately, there's no weight to it. Again,
hear me out. He rocked that fucking coat.
Oh my God, I was about to say, when he came out looking straight up like Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty, literally no reason, like no setup to this entire like bombardment of ants and everything. I was like, you know what? Give it to him. This has been 3 movies of setting this guy up to be like the ant guy. Give it to him.
I mean,
I'm
here
for
the whole
it.
thing throughout this movie is he's the ant guy. So
yeah.
Here's the interesting thing with the Rick and Morty comparison. Because I've been like quietly doing research on Jeff Loveness specifically while we've been doing this. The last thing he wrote on was Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
This is actually his feature film debut.
Oh wow.
But like you can see kind of the Rick and Mortyisms.
Yeah.
In this, particularly
the Holes guy
with the ants.
And the Holes guy, I would say the Holes guy is a straight up Rick and Morty character.
When the Holes guy, like when he gets shot a bunch and when he changes all the holes into one holes and sucks in all the guys. First off, very, very reminiscent to me of the moment in Guardians of the Galaxy where Groot just murks a bunch of people.
Oh sure.
In the hallway.
Yep.
But also was like straight up like, oh shit, what the hell?
Also, like it reminded me of that tentacle thing from The Force Awakens. I don't remember what those were called. That Han was like shipping, and then those guys come
Falcon.
In.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Millennium Falcon stuff. Yeah, whatever they were called. Remind me a lot of that, of just like this large globular thing with tentacles and stuff. But or even
always funny.
Or even the opening of Guardians 2, where they have that thing that is trying to, they're trying to steal the light bulbs or whatever it was. I don't remember. Stealing the batteries. And I
also like the buildings that were alive. I thought that was a cute little thing.
That joke was really funny too. Of like, your buildings are dead.
Yeah.
It's like those little character moments were funny.
Were really funny to me. Like the guy who's like, can we torture them? Can we torture them? The
Oh, sure.
enthusiasm in his voice was.
Well, hey, I mean,
genuinely funny to me.
he died, so that's stakes, right? This unnamed, well, I mean, he's named, but like this character without a face that just shoots a laser as like bootleg destroyer in the MCU
Yeah, I'm gonna be
gets
honest, I
his
don't
face
remember that
wrecked.
name. I
Well,
don't
and that's
remember that name at all.
again part of the problem with the movie.
I'll give a shout out to William Jackson Harper, though.
He was so good.
Incredible.
Oh.
Incredible. Like they gave him really nothing to do, but every scene he was in, I was like, I want more of this guy in the MCU, and it's a shame he's stuck here.
So I thought
like,
for sure
so-
that was going to be Quasar, not which essentially is this name being Quaz.
Quaz.
But like I thought for sure we were like, oh, this character's gonna pop up later or for something. Nah, he's just hanging out in the quantum realm still.
So I really hope, and we've seen this before with Marvel, and people were speculating this before this movie came out, that William Jackson Harper could potentially be the MCU's Reed Richards, and he was stuck in the quantum realm for some reason.
Right.
And that would make sense, you know.
So disappointed it's not
In the comics, Kang is not black, so it would make a lot of sense if, based on us knowing from the comics that Kang is a direct descendant of Reed Richards, that
Sure.
Reed Richards could be black in the MCU, and that I think William Jackson Harper would be a fantastic choice. And knowing that, like, I had a weird out of left field prediction before this movie came out that has been completely debunked by the Council of Kang scene, that Kang could have potentially been a descendant of T'Challa in the MCU as opposed to Reed Richards,
Interesting.
and that would have been an interesting way to take the character,
He still
knowing
does,
that there's that
still
fam-
happen.
No, he can't. And the reason I say he can't is the technology that the Kangs use to all appear in the Council of Kang's room is the exact same teleportation technology that Reed Richards uses in Multiverse of Madness.
Well, isn't the inclusion of Ramatut also counteractive to that as well?
No, because
Isn't Ramatut?
they did that in comics as well. And basically, the answer to it, as is the answer to many things with Kang, is timey-wimey bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Sure.
even
Basically
Victor
goes back in time
Timely.
and takes over as a pharaoh.
I mean, Victor Timely is the same thing of a variant of Kang going back in time and imposing his belief in time travel and the manipulation of time into early 19th century, 20th century, middle America. So seeing more of that, the incursion of Kang at various points in the timeline is going to be really interesting to see moving forward.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of other moments that there's some really cool, interesting moments in this, especially visually. Like the probability storm was something that
was cool,
really cool to me, and a great joke with Baskin Robbins' version of Scott there makes zero sense, but it's still kind of funny.
I'm also like, as much as I have my apprehension about this movie, I do feel like it is one that I will look back on, like Thor: The Dark World and like Age of Ultron, that while as its own standalone film didn't, set the world on fire, it set the groundwork for a lot of what was to come. So much so that I'm still going to go and buy the book that they wrote and are publishing of the book that Scott Lang wrote in universe. And the fact that they're doing that is just another thing that I love, that Marvel likes to merchandise stuff like that.
And I'm a solo for that kind of stuff. I'll buy it.
100%.
Yeah, like
weird
give me
ass.
all of that cool
Griffin
stuff.
and I both have the copy of the novelization of the Imagineering story that we need to read at some point, because it's like 700 pages. It's a real thick boy, and it's just,
chapters in there. That's pretty good.
I gotta start it. I just haven't had time.
Again,
Too much going on.
I recognize that I do the most hipster thing possible with reading this book, of go to a coffee shop and hang out for 2 hours. But
Okay, so I'm not really a coffee guy. I've never been a coffee guy. I don't drink coffee, and this is gonna be a weird tangent, and I apologize. I mentioned before we started recording that the first showing I went to of this was actually in the US. Went down for a couple of days for celebrating my wife's birthday. And when I travel, I get a little, what's the word for it? Backed up. And nothing was really working until I had a couple of coffees yesterday, and then I felt much better.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Coffee does that.
I don't drink coffee, but if I need to, it's break glass in case of emergency situation. If we've got that Keurig sitting out there for tea, and thank God we had a couple of coffee pods.
Look, as the person who drinks like 3 or 4 cups of coffee a day, it does that to you.
Oh yeah.
I will probably go and get coffee after this recording today.
Fair enough.
It's a problem at this point. I'm sorry. This is what happens when I work at like 7 in the morning and also hang out with my friends until like 2 a.m.
Time zones are hard.
speaking of more moments in this, but I actually do want to go back to the probability storm, because like aside from being visually interesting, I did think that was one of the cooler story moments of the whole idea of this thing being blown up, having to shrink it back down. I'm not going to question how the tech works.
Okay.
It
Okay.
doesn't.
It doesn't. It's weird.
But none of it does, because it's shrinking and growing and time traveling stuff. Like nothing
Exactly.
about the MCU actually makes sense if you think about the science behind it. And they had that fun moment in Endgame where they were talking about time travel. Like none of this is what you thought it was in movies, and this is the same sort of thing of just suspend all disbelief. What happened happened. The quantum realm is weird. It just let it be.
But I legit thought I missed a plot point when they shoot like all the Pym particles at it, it shrinks down. And they're like, "Job well done." I was like, "But wait a minute." Yeah. All right.
It was the power of love that removed all the other probabilities so they could shoot a thing at the other
wasn't
thing.
even the part I loved. I loved that it was all of the Scots working together because of Cassie. And because their whole goal is protect Cassie. I thought that was one of the rare moments that we really did actually get to see Scott's love of his daughter.
Yeah.
Sure. Can I ask a question about this though? Why did it have to be that one? Couldn't any of them been because they all theoretically love Cassie the same? Why did
not the Baskin Robbins one, because he wouldn't have had the suit. He needed to have the suit.
But why did they have to dig like that one out? Like, couldn't it just been the one that was already on top? Like that was the point where I was like, I'm missing something.
You have to draw the scene a little bit for
sure.
Ultimately, that's not even a gripe against this movie. That's just a fucking movie thing that drives me crazy in all movies. Of we have to extend this a little bit because we have to hit a certain runtime.
They could have done that by elaborating more on the situation between Kang, Cassie, and Scott, and they didn't do that, which would have made this scene even more impressive if the stakes were as high as they were about getting that time back with Cassie, as opposed to just steal a thing or I'm gonna kill the kid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's one more thing I want to talk about scene-wise specifically, obviously far from the end of this conversation, is that final fight between Scott and Kang. Because this is an issue I have not just with this movie, but a lot of Marvel movies, frankly, where you have these characters, right, with these insane powers, and then they just beat the shit out of each other. That's all they use them for. They say fuck the powers and just punch each other a bunch.
That being said, Kang curb stopping Ant-Man, I know we got it in one of the trailers. It's just like he was legitimately trying to murder him, and that's what you need to do in that situation to get out. And Scott's realization of he doesn't have to win, they just both have to lose makes a lot of sense.
All that, like, and Kang's fight choreography in general was really cool because you saw it like stolen from some of the Avengers. Like him shooting his lasers was absolutely taken from Iron Man. In the moment when he steals the giant torture guy's laser and changes it to his own and throws it back at him, you cannot tell me that was not just the moment from Shang-Chi.
I was gonna say that was ripped straight out of a Shang-Chi fight scene. I think that's
purposeful. I think that they are going to be taking bits and elements from the Avengers and putting them into Kang's fighting style, and I think that's a very, very cool way of doing this character.
Well, especially like you get the weight of Kang being like, "Oh, you're an Avenger. Have I killed you before? Are you the one with the hammer?" Meaning that he has legitimately killed Thor in universe in some parallel Earth to our own or to the MCU Earth is terrifying. And then none of it pays off because his laser got booped. So he punched him and kicked him a bunch and then got sent into the probability storm.
That's my issue with him losing, is like, if you establish that he beat Thor, how is he going to lose to Scott and Hope?
He shouldn't. He shouldn't have lost to the ants. Like, the ants are the ones that messed up his suit. And it's just like, they're ants.
Let's talk about those ants. Because that was the moment that I just couldn't stop laughing. Because I was like, this is fucking ridiculous.
That was funny.
This is a level of ridiculousness that it's like, okay, I recognize that we just have to wrap up the movie. Like I
like that moment. I'm not gonna lie.
I loved it.
It needed to happen, but it also just it didn't feel to me like it paid off much for Hank Pym as a character, other than just like, look, I made super ants.
That's another one where I felt like that plot was supposed to be longer.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I felt like that there was supposed to be drawn out more. Like in the past, like leading up to them finding the superpower dance and everything, like they should have developed that rather than like the Krylar stuff. And
yeah, all you really get setting that up is they see the ant farm before they get shrunk down, and then as they're shrinking, Scott is on the ant farm and the ant farm gets blown up.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then you get
And
that
that should
Oh,
have
and
been
then
two
Hank goes like
superpowered,
this.
super
Hank
smart
goes like
ants.
this. He goes, "Oh, my Bluetooth
Like
is
twice.
acting up." Yeah.
Dude, there's a couple of times where I just legitimately thought it was a hearing aid.
So did I. I was like, "Oh man,
Why is it
poor
like a hearing-
poor
Oh,
Michael
yeah,
Douglas."
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was the thing of like the ants was funny, but no, it was specifically the moment of like them making the socialism joke, of like, okay, yeah, there definitely was more to this bit. Like there had to have been more to this bit. You don't throw a joke out like that without having more to this bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels, yeah, it's like we've been saying all episode. There's a lot that feels like it's missing from this show, for better and for worse. Trying to think of some more moments, though, that were at least somewhat fun.
Shrunk down cop car was funny in setting up Cassie's character when she comes out of
Sure.
jail. Of like the dude knew it was her, and that's good.
Yeah.
think that-
I sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I'm gonna move to an entirely different scene. So.
Oh, I was just well, so was I. I was just gonna bring up a moment that I thoroughly enjoyed. As much as we're knocking on MODOK for being like a silly character and everything, I did like the one moment where they're in like the jail hall and everything, and MODOK like tries to chime in, and Ken kind of like pushes him against the wall and like puts him in his place kind of thing. And just the emotion on this, weird CGI Corey Stoll face. Like I thought that they actually did a good job of emoting like this character that was like trapped and tortured and everything. Not that it really ends up paying off all that well, but just that moment in a bubble I thought was really cool, showing the dynamic of like, Kang and then his henchman in this moment.
We also saw henchman booty at one point, which was weird,
was
but
hilarious.
it happened.
MODOK butt, yeah.
MODOK butt, yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah, I think for me the moment that I actually really did like with MODOK was his fight scene with Cassie.
The end of that of just like, don't be a dick. Like just stop being a dick. You can not be a dick.
But even that, but like the moment where she does exactly what Scott did in the first movie, of puts the blue thing in and grows, and then punches him instead of like getting out of the Quantumverse. I actually really liked that. But also, I just loved seeing the giant fist punching the giant face.
Yeah.
I mean, that was another problem I had with the movie in general. And again, it's just a moment where you suspend disbelief because it's a movie. But I mean, could they not have just like Hope, Scott, and Cassie all had PIM discs, right? So they all presumably could have unshrunk, exited the quantum realm, rebuilt the portal like Cassie did in 30 seconds, and brought Hank and Janet back. And just like, this movie could have been over in 10 minutes. I don't know why it wasn't. Like there was no explanation what was like holding them there or forcing them to stay there. They just were there.
I think that's inherently just a problem with the quantum realm, because even in the second movie, technically they could have done that to save Janet, with the exception of not knowing where she was, right? But they had to build that construct and everything.
The tunnel.
Yeah, so I think it was just something that they wrote in like themselves into a corner, going all the way back to the first movie, and it's just again, movie things just don't make sense.
Yeah, I don't think we're seeing the quantum verse again after this. I think we might see it in passing. Like we might get a little bit of it in like the King Dynasty or something, but I really don't.
Or maybe like a Doctor Strange Easter egg where they're traveling multiverses or something, and the quantum realm is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Like I can't see them using this again. Like as interesting as it can be, because it could be a very interesting story and whatnot. I feel like this movie has kind of ruined it. And it's that thing of like we saw with like Thor: Love and Thunder, of having the different realms. They don't ever go back to those. Or sorry, with Thor: The Dark World, they have all the different realms of the Tree of Yggdrasil. We don't ever go back to any of those realms except for a bit at the beginning of Thor: Ragnarok.
Well, Love and Thunder, isn't he doing his montage in like Niflheim or something?
No, he's on just some random planet.
Oh, okay. For me, I thought that was no, because wasn't like Surtur or something about
no Surtur. Oh, in Ragnarok.
No, I guess in Ragnarok as well. He's in Surtur's domain.
It's the beginning, and that's it. That's the only other time we see the realms. We don't see the realms again after that. It's just random planet hopping with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then with the goats. Because again, this isn't even about Thor: Love and Thunder, but shout out to the goats. But no, I really don't think we're gonna see the quantum realm after this. Like, I also don't know how we're gonna see these characters again. I really think the plan was for Scott and Hope to just disappear.
I think
Yeah, it's hard to say.
I think they confirmed that Jimmy Woo is going to be in something after this, right?
It was
Something.
Coven. What's
Coven of Chaos,
Agatha? Yeah.
or maybe the Vision series we're getting eventually. Or
That was a
I
cool
really
thing.
hope they go.
Oh, Vision.
I really hope they go down the Agents of Atlas route, and he's the
That'd
one
be
who pulls
cool.
that team together. I think that could be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like Randall Park is just phenomenal. I want to see him in more stuff.
It was a really.
I'd
cute
like
moment,
to
though,
see him
of them using
talk
the
too.
magic.
Yeah, that helped too.
It's as far as montage moments go, though, it's not bad. Like Scott using the magic to pull out the credit card on Jimmy was cute.
Oh, that was the other thing that Jimmy Woo was confirmed for was Marvel Zombies.
Ooh.
Oh, cool.
He's gonna be a character in Marvel Zombies.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Forgot that wasn't
Dude,
nice.
every time we hear about that show gets more and more interesting to me.
It does, but also I feel like it's at least 2 or 3 years away
I
at
mean,
this
considering
point, because
What
I
If
feel
got
like,
delayed to 2024. Like, yeah, it is.
assuming What If got delayed, but I still think we might see What If this year.
No, What If did? I think they've confirmed that.
Well, I think they just haven't confirmed anything that isn't Secret Invasion or Loki season 2. I still think there's a chance we could see it later this year, but
And then there was also one of the
X-Men
creators.
97.
Yeah, that they were saying maybe could be this year.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
said they were recording lines for season 2 already. So who's to say? But also, 2D animation and 3D animation have different pipelines.
Yeah.
So who's to say? I'm not really sure what they're. We won't really be sure what they're doing behind the scenes and how they're building these shows until they actually start telling us how they're making these shows.
Give me the assemble. I mean, I still got to watch the assembled episode on What If season 1, but those getting those documentaries is just fantastic.
I'm interested to see the one for this one.
Yeah. Well, they won't talk about any of the bad stuff like the rewrites and the reshoots. That's for dang sure.
But I'm
Nope.
still interested to see some of the behind the scenes stuff on this. Like, even aside from those, the tech they used was interesting. The tech at a definitive level to me is still cool.
Yeah.
I just think there's better uses for it.
And hopefully we see those soon.
Like a
I hope so.
certain TV show coming out hopefully soon about demigods.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, we do know that was shot in the volume, right?
Yeah, we do know that was shot in the volume, but I feel confident in that show. There's a couple scenes in particular that I think were shot in the volume because they're great.
Next to
I'm talking
impossible
about
to
Percy Jackson
do.
and the Olympians, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
Griffin.
Griffin's very obsessed with the
There's a
fact that
couple
the
of
show
scenes
is
in that
happening.
book though that are like very specifically like Greek mythos locations.
Like Mount
particularly-
Olympus.
Yeah, particularly Mount Olympus and the underworld. Which
Yeah.
I can see.
Makes
I can
sense.
see it. But,
But again, that could be tech they use for an episode or a scene, and not, to Steve's point from
I was gonna say,
earlier,
yeah, it looks
an
like
entire
it's-
2-hour feature film.
Yeah, that's the point. It is just points from a scene.
Yeah.
Like I think they were using it like as a background while they were in a water tank, which is actually a
see.
really cool idea to me.
yeah.
Like the volume has these really interesting ways of using it. Use it for those, not just
Everything.
everything.
Yeah, because I think a great like comparison is looking at maybe Thor: Love and Thunder or even Quantumania and comparing that to the Batman. And I think it all comes down to the way that like how much they're using it, but also the lighting. Because I think inherently Disney does not know how to light their scenes as well as use the volume. Because the way the Batman uses the volume is impeccable. Like I would stand to reason that's probably the best example of a studio using that technology versus anything we've gotten from the MCU so far, in my opinion.
Lighting is
I
definitely.
think I would put Mando up there with the Batman in terms of its
Sure.
use of the volume.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I
But it was
by and
also
large do
made
agree.
for Mando.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was technology built for that show. So we're 2 weeks away, and I cannot wait.
I think lighting's an interesting one because that was a big issue with this because it was an entirely CGI environment that
Yeah.
has no touchstones, which is like it's still fascinating.
how do you-
decided to do that? Like every
Yeah,
other
like,
show
how
they
do you-
have hasn't done
Yeah,
that.
you can't light something that has no real frame of reference for how light works. And they even have a joke about that in there of like, why is the sun moving? And then they get attacked by that
Oh,
weird
sure.
sun light bulb ball tentacle thing. But yeah, like how do you light a scene like that? And I think that's something very difficult to do, especially if it's a 2-hour film that takes place entirely in a made up place where nothing makes sense.
So here's my question for you guys. and we're getting to near the end of the show. What do you think is next for these characters? Because obviously we're getting the King setups for the big bad for it, but they obviously did not want to kill Scott for some reason, so they have some plan for him. I still think Cassie's going to end up with the Young Avengers at some point. Like, what do y'all think like the plan is for these characters?
Scott now has a history with Kang, so I mean, it makes sense that he would be the Avengers movies as one of the few people who actually knows him directly. Not like a leader necessarily, but just someone who's there. And like you said, Cassie with Young Avengers.
Yeah, I really hope that when we get to Secret Wars, or probably more likely Kang Dynasty, I really want to see the multiverse. Like when the multiverse saga wraps up, I want the MCU to look completely different. There'll be some touchstones that will carry over into whatever the future MCU ends up looking like, because you have these multiverses collapse on each other, likely to end Secret Wars, and you've got a whole new Earth to play with. You could have new versions of Iron Man, Captain America, whatever the case might be. I fully expect that we are going to get the opening of the Kang Dynasty, and every existing main Avenger is dead. I think Kang will come in and wreck Thor, Ant-Man, Wasp, anyone that's been around, and it's going to be Sam Wilson's Captain America having to assemble this new team, which will be, maybe Bucky, I don't know. It'll be some of these characters we're not as familiar with. It'll be Shang-Chi, it'd be Spider-Man, who no one knows who's behind the mask, thanks to Doctor Strange. It'll be Doctor Strange. It'll be some of these less established characters having to, come together, be a team, and figure out how to beat the Council of Kangs, which will be an impossible task, which will just lead right into whatever happens with Secret Wars.
Yeah, I think we're going to see characters like Miss Marvel, Spidey. I would, with how popular he is right now, I would bet money we see Daredevil as an Avenger.
Daredevil, probably Shuri, I would expect, in some capacity.
Yeah. I think the inclusion in the post-credit scene of Rama Tut, I think definitely sets up him being the villain for Fantastic Four. After that, I'm like, I don't see Doctor Doom being introduced until way down the line. Like, I'm talking even past Secret Wars at this point. I think that's just an inclusion of a villain way too big to not really pay off.
Going to be the next big bad after Kang.
I think so too.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. But
I think Galactus, honestly.
But I think that it's a huge step for introducing Kang the Conqueror here, and not having another movie where Jonathan Majors shows up in any real capacity up until Kang Dynasty. That to me just doesn't make sense. You can't have essentially two phases of movies where your quote unquote threat doesn't show up, with the exception of a TV show. So I'm convinced that he's going to be in Fantastic Four. They're just, obviously holding back on casting news and everything with that movie, but I think it will come out eventually that it will be them versus like the OG kind of Kang as far as like timeline goes.
Yeah, I do wonder though, if Secret Wars is looking to adapt more of the newer Secret Wars storyline as opposed to the Beyonder bringing Battleworld together, it's kind of difficult to do that without Doom. And I could see like there's only a few characters in the MCU that I think could take advantage of a potential Kang as the Beyonder who's been trapped in this time orb thing. Doom is one of those characters. So I do think if they want to set up Doom as a big bad for Secret Wars and leveraging the power of a Kang as the Beyonder or some form of the Beyonder, you need to do that as part of Fantastic Four. But because ultimately I feel like Doom will be a through point throughout the entirety of the MCU's Fantastic Four, but the big bad after Multiverse, I think we're gonna go galactic. It's gonna be Nova being introduced. It's gonna be the Heralds of Galactus, and ultimately Galactus is that big bad at the end of the next saga.
Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm very excited about, and this movie definitely adds to my excitement with that, is seeing these younger superheroes. And maybe that's because I am seeing more superheroes closer to my age. Here's a reminder, folks. I'm young.
Yeah, you are a child.
But that is the audience for this movie, as much as demographics go. It is starting to skew younger and younger.
Yeah.
I like seeing these characters. I really hope that these characters get to see the spotlight. Like, obviously,
I agree.
you have these big characters that are focal points now because of the MCU. Like, they do not matter into this conversation, but Iron Man and Captain America, particularly Steve, are so popular now because of the MCU. I feel like the MCU could do that again for some of these characters.
I think
and to your point,
specific...
I was just gonna say, to your point of giving a spotlight to some of the newer characters, that's what I ultimately hope we get, because obviously the whole potential of Multiverse Saga is to bring in cameos from all these other characters, and people go nuts with that sort of thing on Twitter. And like, I personally don't want them to go nuts with that. Like, people are like, "Oh my God, we could get Toby and we could get Hugh," and I'm like, to me, that's not as interesting.
Let Deadpool 3 be the
have them as
cameo fast, right?
like,
let
if we
other
wanna
movies get,
do-
and then let the larger team up movies stand on their own based on what
like-
they've been building over the saga.
me, a cameo isn't interesting to me unless there's like character significance behind it. Like, obviously No Way Home did that very well, and I think Deadpool, if executed very well, could do that as well. I don't care to have cameos from every Fox character and every whatever in Secret Wars sort of thing.
The only exception to that is if we get Nick Cage as Johnny Blaze in any of these movies, I will be that person hooting, hollering
Here
at
it
that
is
screen.
again.
I'll be right there with you. I'll be right there with you.
That's
If
the
there are
only
some
one I
fun
need.
ones, I don't
It's
mind.
Only
bring
one.
this up. Like, you bring this up every time we talk about Marvel.
Look, those movies aren't that bad, and the first one is on Disney Plus in Canada. So you know what we're going to be talking about at some point soon, right, Griffin?
Yes, but also, like, our last few episodes have been Marvel, so we need to do something different.
Yeah, I know.
I will say, going back to the Young Avengers thing, it almost seems like insane if they don't do something with it, because the entirety of Phase 4 was introducing legacy characters with their Young Avengers counterpart, whether it be Kate Bishop or otherwise. And I think, isn't that the rumored plot to the Vision Quest TV
Yeah,
show?
It'll be something to do with Young Avengers.
Yeah.
And Feige even just said, Miss Marvel steals the show in the Marvels. Like, I think that's
was
what
the
most
thing.
people are looking forward
still
to,
tell
right?
you
That
Like,
was the
she's-
thing I was going to say, is Miss Marvel needs to be the central character of that movie, and it needs to be this, moment in the spotlight for Miss Marvel to
For sure.
catapult her into the zeitgeist of everyone needs to know everything about this character, because she's so dang good in the show. Again, 3 out of the 4 of
Love that
us here are
character so
Canadian.
much.
Shout out to great Canadian actors in the MCU. I mean, Evangeline Lilly here, and Iman Vellani, and Miss Marvel. And we need more of Miss Marvel in everything, please.
I got 2 things on that. First off, Iman Vellani is coming for Kevin Feige's job. She is going to take over at some point, mark my words. But second off, like, with these characters they're introducing, and with the hints of story we got about Cassie in this one, I would not be surprised if they go a Champions route with this. Champions is a comic book I will always recommend to people, where it isn't about fighting villains. It is about helping people in ways that today are typically concerned. Wow. I cannot speak. I'm trying to touch on something important when I can't speak. The Champions help in ways today that are considered to be radically left. We are just helping people for the sake of helping people. Y'all that are trying to hurt these people, be damned. I really think that could be an interesting story here. I don't think that is a story we would have gotten with Bob Chapek. And I think that is something that I can say for certain after seeing Thor: Love and Thunder and after seeing this movie. With that, I hope we see a great trajectory going forward with this. I really think Marvel's going to get some more creative freedom with what they're doing. So
yeah, I hope they do the Champions plot. I do still think that if they do anything around Champions, that it'll still be called Young Avengers, because they want that name recognition. It's a way to sell the product, but ultimately I think that story would be really good to tell on screen, especially if you go into introducing, like, I know She-Hulk tried to introduce more Hulks and didn't really. But if you do, the Amadeus Cho storyline, or you have Hulkling introduced at some point, like, there's some really interesting things you can do there with Wiccan and Speed being introduced in WandaVision, and that elaborated on in Multiverse of Madness. It's another couple of characters you can bring into that. America Chavez, for as much as Griffin laments the way that character was portrayed in Multiverse of Madness, you definitely could have a chance to redeem that character and make her role within the wider MCU that much more significant, because she's a very significant character to the multiverse saga, specifically in the MCU, and I want to see her get this spotlight as we move through this phase of the MCU. So it'll be interesting to see what else they decide to put out, and then balancing that with one, what's already been announced, and two, just the onslaught of Marvel content that we've seen over the last couple of years. And if they're slowing that down, what that means for this saga. Is it, the next 3 years, or is it the next 5-6 years, which is honestly what I would prefer.
That's the thing that worries me about like this whole like theorization of that Secret Wars is going to like totally reset the universe. Is I really hope it doesn't.
See, I think it'll be like in the comics where it'll be like a partial reset.
So here's the thing: if it resets it, it means that they're going to be reusing these characters. Like, just long and short, the business decisions behind that make sense. As much as I hate it, they make sense. Name recognition. It's a safety blanket. It's why Disney keeps remaking classic movies in live action. Please stop.
Hey, Little Mermaid looks great.
Little Mermaid does look fantastic. I'm very concerned about the live action Lilo and Stitch.
You're not a fan of Zach Galifianakis?
Oh, love him. I just am terrified to see whatever live action Stitch looks like.
It'll look like Stitch, just live action. Look at the... it doesn't matter.
Yeah, anyways. I hope these characters... I really, really hope that these characters get the spotlight. Like, these are fantastic characters. It is interesting. It is diverse. It comes from every possible angle of seeing these characters and seeing what they're going through, where they're coming from, who these characters are. It's why I love Marvel so much, is these characters that they have a chance of bringing in people like Ironheart, like Miss Marvel, like Cassie,
like the Hood, the villain in the Ironheart show. I never would have thought we'd see the Hood in live action, but Anthony Ramos can do very little wrong, and we're gonna get that at some point through Ironheart, and I cannot wait for something like that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say here is like Young Avengers is happening. We know it's happening. They have set up way too much for it not to happen. I just hope they give it the weight that they give the Avengers, because that is the big issue. Like this should be the future of the MCU with the Young Avengers.
Yes.
I think just, to your point about the oversaturation and everything, I hope they lean more into standalone things. Like, not everything needs to relate to everything. Like, I didn't like Moon Knight at all. I thought it was super underwhelming. But two strengths of that show for me were Oscar Isaac and the fact that it was completely standalone. Like, there was, like, maybe one reference to the blip, and that's it. And, like, I think stuff like that is more interesting. And I think that's one thing that DC has going for it with their new plans is very clearly we're doing Elseworlds. That is a clear branded thing. It's separate. If you still want Robert Pattinson to be his own thing, that's happening. If you like Joker for whatever reason, that's still happening. I like that, and I know obviously the MCU is a built-in brand and it's a little different, but you still have stories within the MCU that don't necessarily need to be hugely connected. Like, it can be sort of winks and nods and things. I hope they lean into that more, and that kind of helps avoid the issue of continuity and everything. Like, just tell their own stories. You don't have to worry about baggage of other things. Like, obviously there's still value in connective stories, but I would like to see a bit more standalone stuff too.
Well, I mean, they've done that fairly well. You look at characters and their introduction, someone like Shang-Chi, where it connected back to some of these other films, but largely stood on its own, but has strong connections back to the rest of the MCU, and gives him a way into this larger global multiversal plot, whatever it's going to end up being, however that pays off. I love stuff like that. I don't love what they did with Spider-Man in the MCU, just because it was Tony Stark Jr. until the end of the third movie, when he kind of can stand on his own as his own character. So yes, more like Shang-Chi and less like Spider-Man is not what I expected to be saying today, but it's kind of where I went.
I mean,
I agree.
Top
Good
tier.
point. I agree.
But with that, we probably should wrap this up. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half about this movie. I guess to wrap things up, we've talked about a lot of negatives. We talked about some positives. Should people see this in theaters? That is my question I'm going to pose to you guys. Who's going to get the short end of the stick and have to go first? That's Steve. You have to go first. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. No, that's okay. I think, yeah, why not? I think it's still a fun time. Like I said, unfortunately, I walked away feeling really nothing, but that's not inherently a negative thing. It just is very middle of the road. I thought Paul Rudd, I'll go and see anything he is in. Again, I don't think we talked too much about him as a character or as an actor in this movie, but he was a delight to watch. Anything he does is just fun. He has a presence about him. But that plus Jonathan Majors, I think it's a combination that deems a ticket at very least. But if you're busy for the next couple weeks, I wouldn't put it past you to just say, okay, I'm gonna wait for the Disney Plus release, because that's what I'm gonna do for another rewatch. I'm not gonna rush out to the theaters to go see this again, but I am looking forward to watching it at some point down the line. I'm just not eager to jump back in right now.
Brad, what about you?
I'd say, like, if you're a hardcore fan like us, obviously, I would say it's worth seeing in theaters. Or if you're someone who just really likes going to the movies, but like honestly, I would say like otherwise, most people could just wait for Disney Plus. I mean, the window between theatrical and streaming now is so short, anyways. So like, this movie will be on Disney Plus before you know it, and there's plenty of other things to watch and do. Like, I don't know. Especially knowing that the average person doesn't go to the movies that often. Like, I would wait for Guardians. Like, I feel like that's going to be the big one that's worth seeing, and then we'll see about the Marvels. But I have no doubt that Guardians is going to be like incredible. Like maybe wait to see that in theaters one, maybe two times. But yeah, I would wait for Disney Plus for Ant-Man personally.
Mitch, you're out.
Just wait. Honestly, there really isn't, like Steve was saying, coming out of this movie feeling very mid. There really isn't any reason to rush out to the movies to see it. It acts as a trailer for the rest of the multiverse saga. It doesn't really need to be consumed now. I would honestly say you could probably wait until closer to Kang Dynasty to see this one, or at the very least, like Loki season 2. It's not something that you need to rush out to see. It's especially if you're living in a market where AMC in the US is now doing their weird tiered pricing thing for tickets, which is only going to continue to be the downfall of cinema, which is unfortunate, because I love the movie theater experience. But for this specifically, there weren't moments where the audience got into it with me the way that I had expected them to. So like the Thursday night showing I saw, there were maybe, now this was an outlier because it was like a 4 o'clock at this weird theater in the middle of nowhere, and there was maybe 10 people in the theater. It was just odd and very quiet for the whole movie. It was really weird. The second showing I saw, the theater was full. It was a smaller theater. It was the VIP theaters we have here in Canada, similar to the Alamo experience in the US. So, you know, legal drinking age, adults only. You don't get the rowdy crowd. It's the only way I can watch movies these days, honestly, because I don't like having to deal with kids in the cinema. And there were moments where people, you know, chuckled together, or people laughed at things that I didn't laugh at in my first showing that other people found funny. And it was interesting to get that contrast, but I didn't get, there wasn't an end game moment. There wasn't even like Thor Love and Thunder with Jane. Like there weren't those moments of the collective theater experience adding value to my movie watching experience. So it's very easily one I can recommend to say, just wait and watch it at home.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah,
there isn't that community moment.
No,
I'm actually on the same boat. Like, I am significantly more positive than the rest of y'all on this movie. I really did enjoy my theater experience. It's not even, though, about the movie for me. It is just how expensive theaters are right now. Like, as much as I love this movie, it does not warrant the $15 ticket, the $30 popcorn and soda. Like, if you want to see it, go see it. Because it is, to me, it is a very fun theater experience. Like, while a joke may not hit for you, it will hit for somebody in that theater. And I think that is a very fun way of experiencing this movie. I'm just not sure it's worth the money of going to a movie theater right now.
Yeah. If you're already subbed to Disney Plus because you're watching the show, and we appreciate you for doing that, honestly, you could probably wait and just give this episode a listen, even though you're at the end of it, so you shouldn't be hearing this unless you've already seen the movie. We probably should have given this recommendation before the spoilers, but I digress.
I probably should, because this is the most important part of the episode.
Yeah, just wait and then come back and listen to this listen to the rest of it, I guess, when you've seen it.
Hey, this is perfect because this movie's about time travel nonsense. So there we go.
So what you're telling me is you're going to do an actual edit on this one and take this part and put it at the beginning and then let the rest of the episode play out?
I'm just going to clip this part out and put it before the intro. No, I'm not.
Yeah, that works too.
That's way too much effort for me.
That's too much work.
But with that, it's a good point. I need to wrap up the show. Brad, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, guys.
No, thank you guys. I always love chatting anything Marvel, Disney with you guys, so appreciate it.
Yeah,
happy to have you guys back on it.
All right, folks, looks like the podcast is experiencing some technical difficulties. We'll be back in just a moment.
Griffin, some timey-wimey shenanigans just went down, and we're back, I think, and you probably made things sound and look not terrible, so
Things
that's
look
good.
Way better now. I'm sorry about that. My internet took a poop. But we
well,
are back.
Yeah, awesome. So if your internet hadn't gone poo-poo and you wanted to keep up with what Brad and Steve are doing all over the internet, Steve, I'll throw it to you to let us know where we can keep up with that.
Okay. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at svegvari, SVEGVARI. That's where I post all my work. So if you're looking to find me across the internet, that's probably the best place to do so.
Brad, what about yourself?
I'm on Twitter at Brad Shankar, BradShankar. All my work is on Mobile Syrup. That's a play on maple syrup, but mobile like phones. Some of Steve's work is actually on Mobile Syrup as well. So if you want to keep up with both of us, you can do so on Mobile Syrup.
And I definitely do, and I highly recommend everyone else out there does that. Even if you're not Canadian, there's some really great stuff that's written
I
up there.
try
that affects
not to make
all of
the
us.
stereotypical Canadian jokes, but when you set it up like that, it is so hard not to.
Sorry. And if people wanted to keep up with our stuff, Griffin, where would they do that?
Well, you can find us everywhere at D+Us. But the big thing right now is if you were listening to this on podcast services, go over to YouTube and check us out. Link in the description, as always. Also, go check us out on TikTok, where we are breaking things out, creating, little teasers for future episodes.
I still will stand with the fact that Strange Worlds is the Osmosis Jones sequel we never got.
Huh.
Weirdly, one of our most popular TikToks.
It's because it's true.
I think it's just because people were being mean about the movie. But
Also that, but still true.
No, you can check all of our.
I didn't care for that movie at all, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, go check that out on our TikTok at D+S. Again, link in the description. We got other stuff out right now. We do have a episode by episode recap of the National Treasure Edge of History series, completely finished. Go check that out if you are interested.
One of the few outlets that actually did that.
I know that no one's interested, but I was interested, and it was a great time. We will be doing episode by episode reviews of The Mandalorian when that starts, and we will have our next episode out in a couple weeks, all about The Last Jedi. This is one of those rare moments where we have an episode ready in the bank. Will we be trying to do this more? Yes. Will we? Well, that's
Probably not
to be determined. We're not good at scheduling. But no, keep an eye out for more content everywhere. We've got a lot of stuff coming, a lot of stuff we're super excited about, and we cannot wait to share it with you. But that is for the future. So until next time, have a magical day.
Excelsior.